Hello and welcome to the Ascendant Art Podcast, where we are on a search for art that is ascending above the mainstream. I am Mike with Catalytic Comics, your host. And tonight with us, we've got Joey out there, the Keeper's Cairn, and Vinny of Little Chad. So just for quick introductions here, I am a relatively new guy in the world of comic books and pop culture, and once I got interested, just started up a little deal called Catalytic Comics and the comic book Petro Patriot. If you want to check it out, catalyticcomics.com, where we will try to make you laugh and make you think. And next up, tell us more about what you're doing, Joey.
Hey, I'm Joey, aka Slender Dad, and I am working on a book called The Keeper's Cairn. It's high fantasy with a lighthouse wizard who finds kind of a Lovecraftian Pandora's box, and crazy dark adventures ensue as he tries to figure out how to prevent the box from eating him. I'm also the resident gamer, and whenever we talk about things in that field, that's kind of where I have the most to contribute.
Nice. And yeah, Vinny, tell us about what you're doing.
Yep. My name's Vinny. The creator and I guess publisher, technically, of Little Chad, The Adventures of Little Chad. It's a web comic strip, kind of just in the vein of Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts, kind of for the 21st century, and dealing with things that fun way. Available at littlechad.com. You can find us on Twitter, Subscribestar, all that good stuff. And just trying to make content that people can enjoy and hopefully get a good message out of
it. Nice. So, of course, we've got the expert in games, including tabletop, and an expert in comics. And I guess I'm just the expert in asking questions because otherwise I got no idea what I'm doing. But man, it's a fun concept that we're working on here. And tonight, for what's going to be our first episode, we are looking at the trailer for a new TV series coming out. So this is Hawkeye. And we thought it's a good place for us to start because we can talk about some of the trends going on out in the popular culture space and talking about, right, kind of like what is mainstream and what's some of the stuff we're looking for. Now, Vinny, I know you are very well versed in some of these characters. So yeah, please tell us a little bit more what you know about Hawkeye and a little bit more about this new series coming out, including the trailer.
Yeah, so the trailer dropped for it's going to be a Disney Plus show, as a lot of the Marvel content is moving over to Disney Plus in addition to the movies. So Hawkeye, the character that most people are familiar with from the Avengers movies, he's the one that uses the bow and arrow, played by Jeremy Renner, is getting his show, because he's actually a fairly fan favorite character. There's a lot of people who enjoy Jeremy Renner's take on Hawkeye from the Marvel movies. He was the down to earth kind of everyman character on the Avengers. They even make some jokes about it throughout the movies about how he's just a guy with a bow and arrow fighting with gods. So he gets his new show, and they immediately they're pairing him with Hailie Steinfeld, Oscar-nominated actress from most people might have known from her first role in the True Grit remake. She was also in Bumblebee, Pitch Perfect, and a lot of other stuff. She's going to be playing Kate Bishop, who is kind of like the protege slash new Hawkeye. This kind of ties into what they did in the comic books, where Kate Bishop got introduced in the Young Avengers and has now officially become, I think, the Hawkeye of the Marvel Universe. He even gets the title and the mantle of Hawkeye. I think Clint Barton, who is the original Hawkeye that Jeremy Renner plays, might, I think, be officially known as Ronin again in the comics, or even just Clint Barton. So the trailer came out, and it actually, I think, looks like a pretty decent show. And I'm not surprised. The production values on the Disney shows have been pretty good. You can tell that they're trying to make it look successful. I think what I think is really interesting is that Kate Bishop has been a lightning rod for criticism in the comic fandom, as an example of Marvel's tendency in the last 10 years or so to basically replace legacy characters with gender swapped or race swapped new versions. And so Kate Bishop is kind of one of those examples. And, because in the comics, she's just a way better Hawkeye in every way. But my inclination from looking at the trailer on the TV show is I think they're going to actually try to make her a little bit more human, give her a little bit more of a character arc. Some of that's coming from going through the trailer in detail and seeing that there's scenes where Hailie Steinfeld's character has a lot of bandages on her face, clearly got beat up. Not someone who's just capable of taking on anybody who comes at her.
Or in one
So I
case where
think
she's trying to zip line in and then she messes it up and crashes in front of everybody, which
yeah,
I mean, yeah, if you're talking about someone getting mentored, it's a good growth arc when you do that.
Yeah, and I think Marvel is smart enough in trying to appeal to the general audience that they're going to know that kind of thing will play better. And so I think they're not going to make it as overt or as bad as it was in the comics. And so I think this show is actually going to be probably pretty well received. I think most average people who just enjoy the movies of the Marvel movies are going to end up enjoying this because it looks like it's going to be in the vein of a Die Hard set at Christmas time. Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye character was just trying to enjoy a nice time in the holidays in New York City with his family. They even have a funny little gag where it looks like there's a Steve Rogers based musical that they're going to see, where there's a song and dance with stuff like that. So it's going to look funny, and then he's going to get sucked into this criminal stuff going on where Hailie Steinfeld was trying to fight crime in his costume, and he has to stop it. Then I'm sure action comedy ensues. So my feeling on that is the show itself is probably going to be pretty middle of the road and probably pretty good. But I think where the perspective that we should look at that's more, kind of in the vein of what we're talking about with Ascendant art and how people are kind of attacking things is this concept of replacing the masculine with the female characters constantly, and not just doing that, but also making the characters better. And this is something that's more prevalent in the comic books because they started it earlier, but we can see it happening in the Marvel movies and TV shows. WandaVision clearly established that Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, is going to be pretty strong and probably going to, out, magic Doctor Strange pretty quickly. Thor: Love and Thunder, which comes out, I think next year, is going to have Jane Foster taking up Mjolnir and being the new Thor. The Marvel What If cartoon, which is ongoing right now, the very first episode, which was heavily promoted, had Peggy Carter, as played by Haley Atwell, getting the super soldier serum and becoming Captain Britain, but also being a much better Captain America than Steve Rogers was in World War II. We've got Miss Marvel coming out with Kamala Khan. That's a comic book character that's going to be coming to a Disney Plus show. She's a young woman who being inspired by Captain Marvel, becomes a superhero. And she's not just going to be in her own show. She's going to be put into the Captain Marvel sequel, which is just going to be called Marvels. And that's going to have Brie Larson's Captain Marvel, the Kamala Khan Miss Marvel. She-Hulk is going to be getting a Disney Plus show. It's to the point where a lot of people on YouTube and the internet and some other places are describing it instead of the MCU as the MSHU, because it's just obviously they're almost doing it on, clearly on purpose to sideline the male characters and emphasize the female ones. a pretty famous scene in Avengers Endgame that got a lot of groans by a lot of people was when they had that force like all women power moment.
Mhm.
You know, where all magically somehow in this giant war zone, every single female hero of note was in the same 10-foot square radius to have like a moment to like be on screen together in a hero shot, which kind of was the signal that this was where they wanted to go with the next phase of the Marvel movie.
Yes, indeed, and it kind of leaves you wondering the question of like why, right? Because the thing is, of course, right, there's kind of a rule that we talked about offline that kind of led us to start this podcast, which is right, beautiful things are things that reflect what is true. And we know that this concept of the hero, and especially in the case of Hawkeye, right, like because he's not a superhero, so we're not doing any of the exaggerations, but it's this idea of right through training, perseverance, and character, right, like even someone who's very much an everyman, in this case from coming out of Iowa, which I can't help but notice the connection also with the University of Iowa there. But right, having gone to the rival school myself, right, it's the idea that somebody like this can then become someone great, and of course you're supposed to read that and be inspired, and that's true for both the male and the female characters. And then further too, right, one part of right kind of the fun of getting into comics is you also look at how people would interact, and you watch how these hero characters do it, so that you can kind of also get cues for that yourself. And that is one of the things that is kind of a problem with this trend is it's almost like some of the interactions, like some of the ways that they set up these characters, it becomes unnatural enough that like you go beyond just right, talking about exemplary people, you go beyond like exaggerating people, but it's like it's almost like you've gone into something that like is not natural or like people don't identify with. But I don't know. I know you've read a lot more of these. Do you ever get that feeling like when you read that for some of the comics, or like when you see some of those scenes, like does it just feel like someone's just forcing it in that case?
Oh, 100%. Like, there's a good example came up with the when Jane Foster became Thor in the comic books. At the time, you didn't know it was Jane Foster. That was kind of a mystery for a while about who was the woman who had picked up Mjolnir and got the mantle of Thor. But what didn't change was that fact that you knew it was a woman. And it was and I forget whether it was the first or second issue with her stopping a villain, a superhero villain, female, who was robbing a bank. And I kid you not, it was a pretty well-known panel in comic community. The supervillain woman, surrenders to the female Thor in the name of girl power. She actually says, "It's great to see a female, fighting crime and such. I'm gonna go ahead and just surrender and get arrested, so that you can get the W." And it's just so ridiculous. It's
Wow.
ridiculous for a couple reasons. Number one, a supervillain clearly isn't going to do that, and number two, it completely disregards the fact that since comics started, there's been female counterparts doing their part in the hero work. You can go all the way back to Lois Lane as the intrepid reporter who was tracking down bad people and like exposing them to the world as a reporter, doing what a reporter should be doing.
Mhm.
And that it just like there's been female heroes, almost since the beginning as superheroes. To Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel of Timely Comics, now called Shazam, had Mary Marvel, and the Marvel family was a pretty early on spinoff. Supergirl, Batwoman, Batgirl, Invisible Woman. The original Avengers, the Wasp was one of the founding members, and this was in the 1960s, 1964, 65, when the Avengers book started. So it's interesting that one of the things that's also common is a lack of knowledge of the past. And then because they don't acknowledge what came before, everything becomes very stilted and platform message oriented instead of trying and to get to the art part of it, when your focus is a platform and a message instead of, telling the story, it's going to be obvious and people are not going to be, you know, enjoying it, and they're not going to stick around for it. And which is why I think the Marvel movie people, like with Kevin Feige, are going to do a better job because they know that that story stuff isn't going to fly as much. And so that's why I think you can see in what was in the trailer, they're going to humanize, they're going to make Kate Bishop actually struggle and go through an arc where she is mentored instead of just being awesome from the start.
No, very good. And because that's also, I think, kind of goes into one of the other themes that we've seen for a couple of these movies as well. Because I remember when the Captain Marvel movie came out, this was one of the criticisms I remember it receiving, is that in that case, right, that character did not go through much of a growth arc, right? Did not really earn her power necessarily, but it's more just, hey, we're just going to drop this character in, and right, she's awesome just from the beginning. And the thing is that it's not just this, like we're like trying to empower a female character thing, but it's almost like you cheapen the character when you do that.
Well, you guys are far more optimistic than I am, because I think that's exactly what they're going to do.
Yeah, tell me more.
I had to clear my throat there. But no, I think the trailer, like so many that we've seen over the last year or two, is a bait and switch. I think what we're actually seeing are very specific parts of very specific scenes that will portray it in a way that makes it look like it's all going to be good and gravy. And then when we actually finally get the show, it's going to be very, very different. And you will see, Hawkeye just getting his ass kicked by this girl in the first fight, but then somehow out of sheer dumb luck, he manages to get her mask off at the end like that. And she's always going to do the right thing. And he'll have to maybe mentor her a little, but she'll be teaching him far more than he teaches her. And eventually he'll either just hand the mantle over to her because she's so much better at this than he is, or they love taking a dad away from his family these days, so they might just kill him off or something, just get rid of him altogether.
It is interesting because I remember seeing this in the trailer. There's a part where he sends his family away as well. And although what's funny about that is, and that would be a little bit different direction to take the talk, is for some reason I was thinking about the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles way back in the day, where it's like the guy's trying to like get out of New York and get back to Chicago to have Thanksgiving with his family. Like I
super classic
of that energy there. He's like, don't worry, I'll be back for Christmas. And so he's got to like go apparently like whoop all this ass with his new sidekick, or maybe he's going to become the sidekick, who knows. But in order to like get back in time for Christmas.
Oh, he hasn't realized it, but he is already the sidekick.
Interesting. And I'm trying to think, because I know these expectations come from precedents. What are some episodes you're thinking of where you've seen this happen before?
Are you talking in comic books and movies, or just in
I would just
pop
say
culture in general?
Yeah.
I mean, Miss Captain Marvel clearly retcon, a nice retro continuity. That's the short term for the people listening who might not be familiar with it. Basically went back and said that the entire Avengers initiative that Nick Fury came up with was all based on Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel character, and kind of cheapens, the Nick Fury character a little bit. So that's one in the Marvel universe that we've got right now. Just recently, the Loki series where Loki was basically replaced by female Loki, Sylvie, for his entire show.
Loki, Thor: Love and Thunder,
Not to mention
Star Wars. We
Mhm.
just decided fuck Luke Skywalker. Let's go with Rey now.
Ray Skywalker.
Supposedly they're gonna do another Black Panther, but his sister is donning the mantle.
Well, that's another one that was in the comic books. Shuri was Black Panther for a while because and this was, they didn't kill off T'Challa. He actually abdicated because he did some things that he thought made him not fit to be the king of Wakanda. So she became the queen and the official Black Panther. He was also married to Storm in the comic books, which they're allegedly going to be working into probably the next Black Panther movie too. Fun enough, the Black Panther sequel is also where they're going to introduce Riri Williams, also who goes by Ironheart in the comic books. She was a replacement for Iron Man. She was not a very popular replacement for Iron Man when she took over for him in the Marvel Now, like Marvel, all new, all different Marvel, from about 2012 through about 2017, 2018, Marvel publicly had initiatives called First Marvel Now and then All New, All Different Marvel, where they made a point of saying they were going to replace the legacy characters, and they killed Tony Stark. And instead of like somebody named like Rhodey, War Machine, James Rhodes, who had been Iron Man previously, like in the 90s, he actually took over as Iron Man for a while. They replaced him with this teenage girl who was not a very nice person in the comics. So they've made a point of doing it quite often. It's started out as like, it's become a trope. It's become expected. It's not subverting any expectations anymore at all. I think Joey mentioned that offline when we were kind of chatting a bit, that it used to be something done for shock and to try to maybe goose sales or to be different, but now it's so expected. It actually would be different if they let the male characters stay.
Ghostbusters. They tried to do it with Ghostbusters. I'm just thinking up titles.
I was gonna say, then there's also the most recent Masters of the Universe where they promise it's gonna be He-Man, and then like,
oh, you mean the Tila show?
Yeah, the Tila show, where like they just where like they where again, you're right. That really was a case of the trailer is like promising one thing, and then like they literally just flip it out on the first episode.
Oh, but don't worry, they're gonna make it all better in part 2.
Yeah, when Andra picks up the sword and becomes He-Man, and
Yeah.
Tila will probably become the sorceress, like they've been hinting she's going to become. I mean, that goes back to the original cartoon, because Tila's origin is that, spoiler, she's the daughter of the sorceress, but they don't talk about it. So,
Yep,
but
something I was aware of there. Yeah,
And I mean, I know this is a long and drawn out play, but I have to point to the fact that there's a deeper problem that's going to arise from this. Very little to do with comics, but everything to do with culture. If you take away all the masculine heroes and replace them with women, the only thing that little boys are going to have left to look up to are villains. Like, I'm sorry, but that's what's going to happen. I'm sure they think that all these little boys are going to start looking up to the superheroines and wanting to be like those, strong, powerful women, but they're going to start looking up to the villains.
Well, I think that's one of
that's interesting take there. But yeah, let's run with that. Yeah, run with it.
I was going to say, I think that's going to. I mean, number one, that's going to be evidenced in the fact that mainstream comic sales and these other are dwindling. They're going down, and manga and the other content producers where that is not the case. If you go into My Hero Academia or Demon Slayer, any of these like amazingly successful manga comic books, they are very prominently still with a male hero, or they're a balanced team where there's males and females both in the hero and villain variety doing great things. And it's no mistake, they're also drawn to be attractive people, which
Demon
is
Hunter is actually really good for like you were saying about a team, because his sister is almost more badass than he is, but she can only come out of the box at night.
yeah, yeah. So and I think that's one thing that that we're not getting the message across as a business. If you want to actually get good sales, you should appeal.
Right.
There's a core tendency in art where people want art that speaks to their soul, and it doesn't have to be. I'm not talking like Jackson Pollock, like super sophisticated, like artsy art. I think like you look at somebody like Norman Rockwell, and his prints sell and have sold for 70 years. It's because people have something when it resonates with them that they like, and that's true, and that goes across art forms. That's television shows, movies, music, like things that are resonant. And it's no mistake that in the world of independent comics, you've got like Iconic Comics with Common America that is finding like cascading success, I guess would be a good term for it, where each iteration gets bigger because the audience doesn't go away. You retain who bought it the first time and you grow to new readers. And that's great because that's what you want to do. You don't want a dwindling, pool of people. You want a growing pool. And you're seeing that with independent artists that are speaking to what people genuinely want in superhero comic books and superhero stories. And I think that we are remiss to not try to look at manga and anime as a good example of doing the same thing, and that's why it's resonating with young people at a much higher clip. And comic books in the 90s still sold at a very high number, hundreds of thousands of comics per issue. And I think there's no mistake that at the time they were still drawing attractive characters that appealed viscerally to younger people who wanted basically a comic book is art and story second, art first, story second. So when your art is attractive and you've got people you like looking at, primary colors, people drawn to be like pinnacles of male and female athleticism, you're gonna speak to a core drive that people want the what is it I guess the aspirational nature of them as myths. And
I was gonna say that is also something we'll definitely have to do just as an episode on its own, because it's definitely a discussion I've seen in a number of art and comic circles that it's surprising like that there are people who say like, oh, it's so offensive to like draw like two muscular male characters or like too sexy of female characters, but then like there are actually a ton of women who want that type of female character. And I've actually gone out and had some conversations about this, and one phrase used earlier, the aspirational nature, aspirational beauty, there is something to this idea of you look at someone who is kind of a reflection of like who your highest self could be, right? Because when we're looking at art, when we're looking at comic books, like we don't want to just look into a mirror. We want to look into something or someone that we can like point ourselves towards, right? A direction we want to go. And that also, I think, kind of brings it back to the story too, that to the storytelling as well, that it's not just like that they're trying to do all the gender swapping or all the replacing, but it's like what are they trying to point people towards? And there is kind of an ideological bankruptcy that goes along with this. It's kind of like, yeah, this replacement movement that we've been talking about.
Oh, another one I just thought of potentially. It's a video game, Knights of the Old Republic. They're doing a new one. I just heard that apparently they hired on a new lead writer who is a feminist that doesn't even like Knights of the Old Republic.
I was gonna say, I wonder
Brave.
what goes into the leadership position.
Stunning and brave.
These.
It's because I mean, I think we have to be honest and say that just straight up, the people making this content have an agenda first, and they're hiring based on agenda to get a message that they want out as the priority versus writing a well-written story. A really great example of this in the video game world is actually with Naughty Dog with Uncharted, with Last of Us 2.
They kind of did it in Uncharted as well.
And actually, I meant actually Uncharted 4, which was the last Uncharted game that came out. It had a female director and head writer who had done the whole Uncharted series. And Uncharted was well known for being basically a very cinematic action game that people enjoyed the story, just watching the story as it kind of unfold. The director ended up leaving due to creative differences with the higher ups at the male higher ups in this case at Naughty Dog, because they wanted to force the Nathan Drake's daughter into the last game as a main character. To be better than Nathan Drake kind of storyline kind of thing.
Well, also in that fourth installment, I mean, Nathan Drake basically spends half the game getting his ass kicked by strong female supporting cast members, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, and the female writer director, game developer who had basically steered the Uncharted series to massive success left because she disagreed with it from a story standpoint, and the male corporate people who wanted to push the agenda said, bye Felicia, you don't let the door hit you on the way out. We've got a goal we have to meet. And that Uncharted game, I would argue, is probably the least well liked amongst the Uncharted fans. And it's the same people that ended up doing Last of Us 2 and pushing the big Abby Pump.
It's because we writers don't get enough credit anymore. Okay, the producers think that they can just hire any old writer and they go check these boxes and make a story out of it and it'll be great. It's like no, there's quality and there's shit, and you want me to make shit.
And I mean, I think you look at it's we've talked a little bit about this amongst ourselves, but the people are coming out of schools and basically that are indoctrination camps where they are taught that the agenda and the message that you need to get across is more important than the story. And to me, it looks a lot like in communist Russia, where I would imagine I didn't experience it myself, but if you were somebody who was creative from like 1920 through 1990 and you wanted to get something officially approved, you had to do it a certain way. And
you will be a propagandist or you will never work in this town is basically what it's become.
Yeah, and instead of the government by way of the Communist Party here in the US, the corporatists have adopted that as their agenda, and if you don't follow the agenda and push that agenda, you're going to be removed for wrongthing, which is like to circle back to the whole point of our podcast. What we're all doing here is each one of us is trying to create independent art that's I would say that even though people might think we have a certain message we're getting across, it's more that we're just trying to make something that's good, that's true to an actual narrative that's based upon being being story first instead of message first.
And on that note, as far as like an agenda or a message, I have been working on the Keeper's Cairn, and very much my main character is kind of a man's man, and my main female protagonist, who is kind of with him throughout the whole story, I mean, she's very feminine, but like they are tackling challenges together the whole time, and there are subtextual messages, like there are morals and lessons and things to be taken away from it. There's some simile, there are definitely some metaphors that I'm sprinkling in there, but most of those I realized as I went, oh, I could do this because this is what it's kind of shaping up to. The story kind of took its own route that way. So my thing is, I wonder if it's that way for the people on the other side of the spectrum, so to speak, if they are intentionally doing this or if they just don't even realize they're doing it.
There's probably a mix of both in this, and also too, just as we're bringing up, you gave the example of like communist Russia versus, or I'm even thinking about, right, for like my family that is over in China, and right, some of this there's almost an art form in like how to like talk past the censors for like certain messages, and there are a couple of well done movies. Maybe we'll mention those at some point. But also too, you mentioned about kind of the corporate side of it here, and I'll tell you, there is a great book by a guy named Michael Rechtenwald. He was a kind of like a communist turned libertarian. He wrote Google Archipelago, and that is where he actually coined the phrase corporate socialism. Because if you understand what socialism is institutionally, namely like the destruction of all the institutions and relationships people normally form between each other, corporate socialism is this maybe not uniquely American, but certainly in the American environment, it is using corporations to do what the state would normally do. And this is in the context of trying to suppress certain types of thought, speech, etc. And that is simply by either, going through payment processors or going through these big companies. But fortunately, like, it's not total. And you're right, there are interesting ways people are getting around it, and they're starting to find success outside of it. And the comic space is particularly active with this, and it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, this is the way, right? You've gotta try to make something that's authentic. I mean, I suppose out of the content that, we're all making, mine might be considered the most overtly political, which is weird to think that a comic strip about a kid just learning, from his mom and dad would
Nah,
do
it's
that.
just wholesome.
And that's the funny thing. I'm trying to just make something that's like I said, Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts are kind of my touchstones for what I want to make with Little Chad. And I still get reactions with people online who think, who feel like they need to attack, my content based solely on the fact that I represent a mom and a dad with their child. Now, we do have the Aunt Karen character who's a foil, but I've also tried to point out and go out of my way to show that they're a family. They still value and love each other, and you don't have to separate and divide people. And I feel like in the content that we're getting from some of the major producers, and this is kind of the evolution of what they're really their end game. No pun intended for the Avengers, but the end game of doing all this is dividing the fans and not actually uniting people. I think it's going to be bad for the bottom line, but might be good for the message. And it's weird that that businesses that are supposed to be like Disney, which owns Marvel and is I guess in the abstract responsible for all these choices since they're the big boss, that they would be making choices that are going to purposefully lessen the appeal of their stuff, but you must serve the message first. And so I have to get to the end point that I'm thinking it is on purpose because there's no business reason to do it.
I don't even think that it's necessarily like dividing the fans is the goal here. I think literally the goal is just a big middle finger to the fans that some other creator garnered together under X comic or Y comic. Like if you really liked Hawkeye back in the day and then someone else took over and started writing it, like, because none of the people who are writing them now were the ones that created them in the first place. Like, I think
Of course,
Spawn might be an exception to that, and that's why it's still worth a shit.
McFarlane hasn't written Spawn in a long time. He moved on from it really fairly quick. But what McFarlane is actually a really good businessman. He realized he needed to get Spawn out on time. He needed to make sure it was there every month, on schedule. And compared to the other guys who founded Image, he became the best businessman, which is why he also started McFarlane Toys and some of those other things.
But didn't a new Spawn just drop recently and pre-order the shit out of it?
Yeah, it was King Spawn, and that's part of the success of it is because McFarlane basically came out and said there's a giant gap in the current comics marketplace for just a really fun superhero comic book. I'm gonna lean into Spawn and make a big, fun, crazy comic that just is Spawn. It's not like an agenda, right? He's a hell spawn, from who died and came back to Earth, right? So it's not really any kind of thing. He's been around since the '90s. He's the same character. Speaking of diversity, he was, Al Simmons, the original Spawn character, was a black military man who died and was coming back to, see his wife and child again. It was diversity, and it didn't make a point about it. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, Spawn's important because he's black. It was Spawn's a big deal because Todd McFarlane's a great artist, and it's gonna look awesome as a comic book. And then it was like, and he's also probably the at the time best-selling black superhero in comic books, just as an afterthought.
I was gonna say almost like right, again, beautiful things are true and attractive things are true, and if you have someone who perhaps is relatable or understandable, or they're going to take you places where maybe in real life you would not want to go, but it's like, but you kind of want to see what it is, right? Like that makes a very attractive story, just period. I'm thinking also too that, again, like this kind of gets to the philosophy side of it, because again, I'm still thinking about this idea of things that are true. And I think what can also happen, and this goes back to that earlier question of, could it just be that some of these people just see it as, oh, like this is a good story, right? And we can think of tons of examples of terrible stories where some people are like, oh no, it really is a good story. And I'm thinking about that a lot of the classic stories and a lot of what I think are going to be the future and Ascendant stories, right? They are the ones that understand, right? What are men and women? How do we get along with each other, right? What is it like to be someone who's new or unskilled and you're becoming the hero, right? What is it like to, if you go out and you create in a sense like your little kingdom or empire, how do you defend that, right? All of these big questions, these stories, like these things that are really quite timeless. Most people do have an inherent attraction to that, but you're right. I do think it's possible that you can give someone a different reality or a different truth to the point that they believe they can create truth however they want to see it. And in my case, like I do come from a little bit more of like philosophical or political background when it comes to all my reading. And I remember it was, I want to say it was either Karl Rove or someone who ran in that same circle, in which he actually used the phrase, it's like, oh, like we are creating our own reality and others are resigned to just sit back and watch us do it. And this was in reference to a lot of the wars going on in the 2000s. And I remember that quote though, and I will have to go back and look up who the actual source behind that quote was. But this idea of like, we are creating our own reality, maybe that's also part of the driver behind all of this recreation of the different stories, the different characters, because you're right, like it's not about pleasing the fans. It's about like, we want to write reality the way we want it to be, and we're going to do it through these stories. What do you guys think about that?
I think that's how you get I Am Not Starfire.
You are completely
like seriously,
correct,
we talked earlier about aspirational characters, and now we have all these comics where it's like, no, it's totally okay if you want to be fat and dumpy and useless and not help anybody. You don't have any responsibility to any of your fellow men or women. You don't have any responsibility to your society. Just serve yourself all the time. Suck on those Slurpees and tell everybody you hate them. It's cool.
And then also like go over to their house and eat their food. I remember seeing that in one of the reviews. And yet still somehow you get these superpowers that are more powerful than anyone else in like a 1 minute transformation arc. And of course, because
It's just a
we're writing
freaking
reality to
mess.
be what we want to.
Like, you know what I aspired to when I was a young man? I was like 12, 13 years old. And I went to the movie place because they rented video games there as well, back when you had to actually go somewhere and rent a cartridge and take it home. And I picked up Final Fantasy II on Super Nintendo.
Yep.
And I played it, and the main character was Cecil, and he was a dark knight. And because of all his dark knightedness and all of the bad things that he had done, like his life went to shit. And everybody hated him and he lost everything. But then he ended up becoming a paladin and saving the whole damn world when he went and fought like the devil on the moon. It was crazy and awesome and aspirational. And it's like, that's what I want. Like, I want to be like the guy who overcomes everything he ever did wrong to do better, and constantly pursued that. Like, but now we're gonna have kids reading these comics and being like, oh, so I don't want to lose this weight because it's cool, because I look like that I am not Starfire comic chick, and I'll just drink more Slurpees and be mean to everybody. And I don't understand why that's the message right now. Like, it's okay to be a complete prick.
Well, I mean, I think if you go back to what comic books and superheroes taught you, I mean, it gets a lot of bad rap. Like a lot of people who didn't read comics, but just to get on my soapbox about why comic books were important and were really good. Each character as a hero represented values that were good for the reader to learn, right? And people kind of get that, but I mean, like there's like important things like Green Lantern was powered by willpower, right? Like in order to use the Green Lantern ring, you had to have incredible will to be able to manifest those things. Batman, he had no powers, right? He did everything through focus, training, and desire, and again, willpower.
Yeah, and even
Superman,
though I was not much of a comics book guy, the other thing that was always so respectable about Batman is he never killed any of his enemies, right? Like, right, he'd put them in
Ooh, I
Arkham
think in the
Asylum or
comics he
whatever.
actually did at first.
well, yeah, we're going back to like 1939 and 1940. I mean, they evolved in fairly quick out of that part because just like everybody who's an artist, when they're making their creations, it does get evolve and change a little bit over time. Our podcast is going to evolve and change, a little bit over time. So I don't I don't hold like that up. Like when the people talk about, well, Batman killed people in 1941. Well, okay, whatever. But it became a pretty well established core tenet of his character as it developed that he didn't use guns and he didn't kill people, which is, one of the reasons why Zack Snyder's version of Batman was a little bit off kilter for a lot of comic book fans, even though Ben Affleck turned out to not be bad as Bruce Wayne. But getting back to what I was saying, like with Superman, he's the most powerful person in the universe. But what makes Superman a hero is what Ma and Pa Kent taught him growing up in Kansas, right? In Smallville. If Superman's not raised by the best parents in the world, he's the worst person ever, right? Like, and that's true for all sorts of comic book stories where they do these Elseworlds or alternate takes on Superman where he goes evil, and most of the time it's because he's not, he doesn't stick to the morals as Pa Kent and Ma Kent taught him. In the Marvel universe, you got people like Hawkeye. Hawkeye is a great example because he has no superpowers. He's self-trained. He's self-taught. He started out as just a guy who grew up in the circus and picked up a bow and arrow and went with it to become like an Avenger, a major hero, and a guy who would stand up to and talk back to the Incredible Hulk, right? So, there's lessons there about learning good values, and I feel like, as a comic book fan, I'm very sad that we're losing that because we're going to agenda, and I can't give my son a Spider-Man comic book that was made in the years he's grown up and think that he's going to be able to enjoy it the way I did. Got good messages out of it. It's actually really sad to think that. And you know,
Well, and I don't know how bad it is in the comic space because I haven't read a lot of the newer comics. I'm more of a manga guy myself, but as far as the movies and these shows and all these live actions go, the characters are slowly turning into cardboard cutouts. Like they're not dynamic anymore. The reason everybody loved Iron Man so much is because Tony Stark went through a growth arc. Like he was not the same person at the very end when he, said, "I am Iron Man" and snapped his fingers. The person he was at the very beginning was not a likable person. He had very little moral value, no respect for human life. Money, money, money. I'm going to be rich. If we got blow people up to do that, I'm cool with it. And then by the end, he's putting everything on the line, sacrificing more than I think any other hero. Like he sacrificed wife and kid and himself all to save the world. Like you're not seeing that with a lot of these new heroes. They're just awesome and they say cool things and they're, they don't care. Like it's almost like their heroism is slowly turning into a joke.
well, I mean, even it's 2021. The Marvel Cinematic Universe started in 2008 with Iron Man, and all the initial
It
movies,
died with Iron Man. Let's be honest.
well, Endgame is a great title, for the Marvel Cinematic Universe there. But Iron Man had the
Indeed.
story arc where he, and this is one of the reasons why Robert Downey Jr. was such amazing casting. Like by picking Robert Downey Jr., all the off-screen baggage that came with him as the actor suited the role because it immediately made, like when he was Tony Stark, the like drunk, narcissistic playboy, everything you knew about Robert Downey Jr. made you subconsciously just think, yep, that's exactly who I'm looking at. So when he started growing as a person throughout the movie and film series, it was good. And Captain America with Chris Evans, they gave him a great story arc where he got to stay true to who he was from the very beginning, but it's the world around him that becomes the source of conflict. How does a man like Captain America, whose superpower was being a good man, and they made that very clear. Captain America is unique in that he was the only guy chosen to be a superhero. Everyone else kind of had it thrust upon them, but Captain America was literally went through the ringer to be chosen to be the guy to be a hero. So the conflict comes from the fact that he's a good man first and foremost, and the world around him is not going to be as good as he is, and he's got conflict from that. Thor becomes unworthy. He can't raise his hammer. He doesn't have superpowers anymore. He has to learn humility to sacrifice to be a humble person in order to become worthy again and then take on his adoptive brother and be a hero. All the first batch of superheroes in the Marvel universe were very much good men who had to learn to be even better to be heroes. There were arcs, there were journeys, there was problems, and there were solutions. And I think, like we see when we mentioned it before, but starting like Captain Marvel, she has no arc, she had no growth, she was just awesome. She was an awesome pilot. She was the most awesome pilot ever. She becomes the most awesome superhero ever. At the end of the movie, you find out the real thing was she just didn't know how awesome she was, and that's when she unlocked her mega superpower, went Super Saiyan on everyone, and was able to do whatever she wanted. And it was only because she didn't know she was that awesome. That's not a character journey. That's not an arc. There's no conflict or resolution there. And it's not going to hold up and attract people's attention going forward.
No, and Thor actually got, kicked in the balls twice as far as his character arc when you think about it. First, he just gives up his lordship. Like I don't care. It's what I've been training and working toward my entire life. But you know what? I don't need to be in charge of Asgard anymore. Valkyrie, you go ahead and take over. I'm gonna get fat and play video games in a little house on the edge of town. And now apparently I don't need the hammer anymore, even though it's the only thing he actually still gave a shit about. Nah, he's just, you know what? go ahead, you take it and be Lady Thor from now on. I'm just gonna get fatter and play more video games in the house on the edge of town. Like, talk about like a burnout character arc.
And I was gonna say, and the thing about that too is it's not that it's gonna be a burnout character arc that he then turns around and realizes his mistake, right? It's because they really do just want him to go away and then just disappear.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is our conversation has kind of evolved from concerns about one show to kind of concerns overall with what Marvel's going to do. But I think it speaks to Marvel is kind of like the biggest pop culture thing going on in like movies and television, and you can see the facade kind of crumbling away because of bad decisions they're making. And it takes a little while for it to, for the people who are just on autopilot going to see a Marvel movie. But I guarantee you, even though Shang-Chi's done pretty okay at the box office, it's not gonna, it'll maybe break even, but it's not making a huge amount of money. And it's not because people are scared to go to the theaters. It's because it's just not appealing. And Eternals, which is the next movie that's going to come out that is diversity as the main goal, I think will be maybe even make less than Shang-Chi, even though it costs more. I think we're going to start seeing fairly quickly diminishing returns, and it'll be interesting to see if there's a course correction or if they double down. And because I think they're going to end up doubling down because they're too ideologically committed to be able to recognize that it's scaring away the customer.
So are we taking bets on who they'll go after next?
Like which character they're gonna, feminize, get rid of, or
Yeah, my money is on Star-Lord.
That's true. I think I mean, honestly, I could see the storyline for Guardians 3 being like Nebula and Gamora were secretly in love the whole time. And
Yeah, I
Star-Lord
just
is
have to assume that at some point they're gonna get rid of Chris Pratt because I know they don't like him. So I'm sure it's in the works.
I would agree. So because that's the off-screen aspect too, right? We know that there's Twitter mobs going left and right to get certain people removed from Marvel movies. Chris Pratt, anytime he even says hello, gets like trending because people want to cancel him because of his personal beliefs. Jeremy Renner is a good example of this. There was a long time where people thought they weren't even going to put him in the Hawkeye show. It was just going to be the Kate Bishop character because Jeremy Renner has a whole lot of off-screen things that are issues for a lot of people, including he's got a very difficult child custody battle with lots of allegations. He's made jokes in interviews that people took the wrong way, specifically about Black Widow being a woman who uses her wiles to get what she wants. And so he's.
But that's what she is.
I mean, that's exactly what she is. But it's a good example of these mobs never let go. Like no matter what is going on. Like I guarantee you, when Hawkeye comes out in November, the TV show, on the day it comes out, there will be a trending thing with people on Twitter pointing, trying to cancel Jeremy Renner or trying to say kill off Hawkeye and give Kate Bishop because Jeremy Renner's a garbage person or whatever. Yeah, if we're putting a bet on it, that's what I'd put a bet on. Is that day there's going to be trending about why Jeremy Renner's terrible and they need to get rid of him.
So in other words, even when they try to appease the mob a little bit, the mob is never appeased.
Oh no, I wholeheartedly believe that at some point during this, they're either going to write him out entirely or kill off Hawkeye and have her take over. And I wouldn't be surprised if next on the chopping blocks was Star-Lord, because we haven't seen much with that particular franchise or that particular IP in a while now. So I'm sure they're cooking something up.
Yeah, guess we're gonna have to find out. And Although when you mentioned about the trying to write Hawkeye out of the script, I just know out of the trailer, he's like, "Look, man, I'll be home by Christmas," so maybe he just goes home.
Nah, he'll never make it.
We'll see. But I gotta tell you guys, it has been a great time though. It's been a good chance to just share about a lot of these different cases, and yet we got to look at a few more of these trends in the future, as well as just see some of the cool stories that are coming out. So yeah, really fun first episode. Had a good time with y'all, and I guess we will meet again next week.
And awesome. It'll be fun. We'll write down the bets so that Joey can pay us all money when Star-Lord turns out to be the new Iron Man. That'll be
That's
No.
right.
We didn't discuss terms of this bet. So
I think we're gonna
I'll-
take that one offline. But
I'll take a first edition of your book autographed is my price right there because that'll be worth money. So I'll take that.
okay,
That's right.
I can do that.
That's right. All right. Well, cool. Well, guys, again, thanks. Have a good one. And next week we'll be continuing the search. Thank you.